The year 1258, a date etched in the annals of history, marking not just the fall of a city, but the extinguishing of a civilization's spiritual and intellectual heart. This is the story of Baghdad, the Abbasid Caliphate, and the unspeakable horror visited upon its royal family by the Mongol war machine. It is a narrative of unparalleled destruction, intellectual devastation, and a brutal end to centuries of Islamic Golden Age prosperity. For over 500 years, Baghdad stood as the undisputed center of the Islamic world, a beacon of learning, culture, and power. Founded in 762 by Caliph al-Mansur, it rapidly grew into Madinat al-Salam, the city of peace. Its round design, with concentric walls protecting the caliph's palace in the center, was a marvel of urban planning. The House of Wisdom, or Beit al-Hikmah, established during the reign of Caliph Harun al-Rashid in the late 8th century and greatly expanded under his son al-Mamun in the early 9th century, was an unparalleled institution. Scholars from across the known world, regardless of their faith, translated Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic. They conducted groundbreaking research in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and geography. Algebra, the decimal system, optics, and early chemical experiments all flourished within its walls. Hospitals were advanced, equipped with specialized wards and training for physicians. Libraries held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, far surpassing any collection in Europe at the time. The Abbasid caliphs, though their temporal power had waned considerably by the 13th century, still held immense spiritual authority over the Sunni Muslim world. The caliph was not merely a ruler, he was considered the successor to the Prophet Muhammad, God's shadow on earth and the protector of the faith. His presence in Baghdad symbolized Muslim unity and legitimacy. By 1258, the Caliph al-Mustasim Billah, the 37th Abbasid Caliph, inherited a sprawling but politically fractured empire. Real military and administrative power lay with the Seljuk Turks, and later with independent dynasties like the Khwarezmians. However, Baghdad itself remained relatively secure, its wealth and prestige attracting merchants and scholars from India to Spain. The city's population was estimated to be well over 1 million, making it one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities on earth. Its markets bustled with silks, spices, jewels, and knowledge. The storm, however, was gathering on the eastern horizon. The Mongol Empire, forged by Genghis Khan, had by the mid-13th century become the largest contiguous land empire in history. Under Genghis's grandson, Hulagu Khan, the commander of the Ilkhanate armies, the Mongol war machine turned its gaze westward. Hulagu's mission, dictated by his brother, the great Khan Möngke, was clear: expand Mongol dominion into Mesopotamia, Syria, and Egypt. The assassination of Möngke Khan in 1259, an event Hulagu was not privy to until much later, would halt his westward advance, but not before the destruction of Baghdad. Hulagu had already demonstrated his ruthlessness in Persia, crushing the once feared Nizari Ismailis, or assassins, in their mountain strongholds like Alamut in 1256. His forces, estimated at around 150,000 men, were a terrifying composite of Mongol cavalry, Turkic allies, and even Christian contingents from Georgia, Armenia, and the Crusader states, who saw the Mongols as potential allies against their Muslim foes. They were highly disciplined, master strategists, and brutal in siege warfare, often employing Chinese engineers and siege engines. Their reputation preceded them. Surrender meant probable survival, resistance meant utter annihilation. As early as 1257, Hulagu sent an ultimatum to al-Mustasim. The message was unequivocal: dismantle your fortifications, submit to Mongol authority, and come in person to offer your allegiance. It warned against resistance, citing the fate of Alamut. Caliph al-Mustasim, perhaps relying on Baghdad's formidable defenses, its large population, or perhaps the belief that his spiritual authority alone would deter the invaders, made a fatal miscalculation. He rejected Hulagu's demands, sending back a defiant, albeit poorly judged, reply. He reminded Hulagu of the caliph's power and the legions of Muslims who would rise to defend the holy city, threatening divine retribution. This defiance, however, was hollow. Al-Mustasim had largely neglected his military. His vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, a Shia Muslim, is often accused by Sunni historians of purposefully weakening Baghdad's defenses, perhaps hoping the Mongols would install a Shia ruler, or simply believing the caliphate's days were numbered. The caliph's army, barely 10,000 strong and poorly equipped, was a pale shadow of its former self. In November 1257, Hulagu began his march towards Baghdad, his forces arrayed in a pincer movement. The main Mongol army approached from the north and east, while a secondary force under Beiju Noyan advanced from the west. The Tigris River, usually a natural defense, became a pathway for Mongol boats and engineering feats. By January 1258, Baghdad was completely encircled. The siege began on January 29, 1258. The Mongols launched a furious assault. They constructed palisades, trenches, and siege towers. Catapults hurled massive stones and Greek fire, a devastating incendiary weapon, at the city walls. The caliph's meager forces mounted a valiant, if ultimately futile, defense. They managed to repel initial attacks, even launching a sortie that inflicted some casualties on the besiegers. But the Mongols' sheer numbers and superior siege technology were overwhelming. Within days, the outer defenses had fallen. The city walls themselves were breached. Desperate, al-Mustasim attempted to negotiate. He sent his vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, and the Nestorian Christian Catholicos Makika II to Hulagu. They offered the caliphs submission, but Hulagu, true to Mongol tradition, saw this as an insult, a sign of weakness. He demanded the caliph come in person. Al-Mustasim hesitated, fearing capture. The Mongols, meanwhile, continued their relentless assault. On February 10, 1258, the caliph, along with his three sons, Abu al-Fazl, Abu al-Abbas Ahmad, and Abu al-Manakib, and a retinue of around 3,000 officials, judges, and prominent citizens, rode out of Baghdad's Mustansiriya gate. They approached Hulagu's camp, intending to surrender. What followed next is shrouded in horror and historical debate, but the outcome was undeniable. The caliph and his immediate family were separated from their retinue. According to some accounts, Hulagu initially treated al-Mustasim with a chilling civility, inviting him to a feast. He then ordered the caliph to command the city's inhabitants to lay down their arms and open the gates, perhaps understanding the symbolic power the caliph still held. On February 13, 1258, the gates of Baghdad were thrown open. Then began the unspeakable. For 7 days, possibly longer, the Mongols unleashed their fury upon the city. The sheer scale of the slaughter is almost incomprehensible. Contemporary accounts, though likely exaggerated in numbers, paint a vivid picture of massacre. Historians estimate between 100,000 and 1 million people were killed. The lower estimates, from more critical historians, still place the count of dead at around 90,000, a devastating figure for any city. Men, women, and children were indiscriminately put to the sword. Houses were ransacked, looted, and then set ablaze. The rich libraries, including the irreplaceable treasures of the House of Wisdom, were utterly destroyed. Books containing centuries of accumulated knowledge in science, philosophy, and literature were either burned or thrown into the Tigris. It is said that the river ran black with ink from the dissolved manuscripts and red with the blood of the slaughtered for days. The cultural and intellectual loss was catastrophic. Generations of scholarship, medical advancements, astronomical observations, and poetic masterpieces vanished forever. The irrigation systems that had sustained Mesopotamia for millennia were also destroyed, rendering large swaths of land infertile for centuries. Baghdad, once a shining metropolis, was reduced to a smoking ruin. Now we turn to the fate of the Abbasid royal family, a narrative that truly defines the brutality of the Mongol conquest. Caliph al-Mustasim Billah and his sons, along with some immediate family members, were initially spared the immediate massacre. Hulagu, aware of the sacred status of the caliph in the Muslim world, had a dilemma. Direct execution by traditional means, beheading for instance, could invite divine wrath or ignite rebellions across the Islamic lands. Mongol shamanic beliefs often held that spilling royal blood on the ground was taboo, symbolizing a loss of vitality or offending the earth spirits. So, a different, more gruesome fate was devised. On February 20, 1258, approximately 1 week after the sack of Baghdad began, Caliph al-Mustasim and his sons, Abu al-Fazl, Abu al-Abbas Ahmad, and Abu al-Manakib, were executed. The traditional and most widely accepted account, recounted by sources like Rashid al-Din Hamadani, a Persian physician and historian who served the Mongol ilkhans, states that they were led up in carpets or sacks and trampled to death by horses. This method avoided direct contact with the caliph's blood, thus circumventing the sacred taboo. Imagine the terror, wrapped tightly, unable to move, awaiting the thunderous hooves. The sounds of breaking bones, gasping breaths, muffled cries under the weight of cavalry. This was not a quick mercy. It was an agonizing, humiliating, and utterly terrifying end to a 500-year dynasty. Al-Mustasim's wives and daughters met a similarly horrific, albeit slightly different fate. Accounts suggest that many of them were also killed, though not in the same manner as the caliph. Some were trampled, some were carried away into slavery, and some were reportedly killed by the Mongol soldiers. The systematic extermination extended beyond the caliph and his direct male heirs. The entire Abbasid male line in Baghdad was meticulously rooted out. Those who were not immediately killed were captured and later executed to prevent any future claims to the caliphate. Rashid al-Din indicates that all of al-Mustasim's sons, all his grandsons, and an estimated 700 other individuals, likely members of the broader Abbasid family and high-ranking officials, were executed around the same time as the caliph. This was a deliberate act of genocide against a ruling elite designed to utterly erase their lineage and prevent any resurgence. One anecdote, perhaps apocryphal but widely cited, illustrates Hulagu's contempt for the caliph's perceived weakness. Hulagu supposedly confronted al-Mustasim about his vast treasures hoarding instead of investing in defense. He placed the gold and silver before the caliph and said, "Eat it. You love it so much." When al-Mustasim protested that it was inedible, Hulagu reportedly retorted, "Why then did you hoard it instead of distributing it among your soldiers, or using it to reinforce your walls?" This exchange, if true, highlights the Mongol disdain for what they saw as effeminate luxury and lack of martial prowess. The consequences of the Baghdad massacre and the extermination of the Abbasid royal family were profound and far-reaching. The fall of Baghdad marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate as a political entity. While a symbolic line of Abbasid caliphs would later be established in Cairo under the Mamluk Sultanate in 1261, these shadow caliphs held no real temporal power. Their role was purely ceremonial, legitimizing the Mamluk sultans. The true spiritual and political heart of Islam, once centered in Baghdad, was shattered. The destruction of Baghdad reverberated across the entire Muslim world. It fostered a sense of deep trauma, a realization that even the most sacred and historically significant cities were vulnerable. It accelerated the decline of Arabic as the primary language of scholarship and administration in many regions, replaced by Persian and later Turkic languages. As the intellectual centers shifted, the devastation also led to mass migrations of scholars, artists, and artisans who fled west to Mamluk Egypt and Syria, ironically enriching those regions while Baghdad lay desolate. For centuries, the city struggled to recover. Its population dwindled, its irrigation systems were ruined, and its intellectual prominence waned significantly. Though rebuilt over time, Baghdad never fully regained its former glory as the undisputed cultural and intellectual capital of the Islamic world. The Mongol invasion had not just destroyed a city, it had fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, weakened the forces that might have resisted the later Ottoman expansion, and contributed to a period of intellectual stagnation in certain Islamic lands. The Mongols eventually converted to Islam themselves, a fascinating twist of history. Ghazan Khan, an Ilkhanid ruler, officially embraced Islam in 1295, marking a significant turning point. The Ilkhanate, Mongol rulers of Persia and Mesopotamia, became patrons of Islamic art and architecture, a testament to the resilience and enduring appeal of Islamic civilization, even after such profound destruction. Yet, the memory of Hulagu's savagery, especially the fate of the caliph and his family, lingered. It served as a grim warning, a permanent scar on the collective psyche of the Muslim world. The massacre at Baghdad was not an isolated incident in Mongol history. The tactic of exterminating ruling families was a common Mongol practice, designed to prevent any future resistance or claims to power. When cities resisted, the entire population and their rulers faced annihilation. This policy, combined with their incredible military prowess, was a cornerstone of their empire building. The destruction of cities like Samarkand, Urgench, and Merv also saw similar levels of brutality and loss of life. But Baghdad held a unique symbolic importance. The story of Caliph al-Mustasim Billah and his family is a tragic testament to the destructive power of ambition, the fragility of power, and the devastating consequences of underestimating a determined foe. It serves as a stark reminder of how rapidly centuries of accumulated knowledge and cultural heritage can be erased in the crucible of war. The methods employed for their execution were not just physically brutal, but psychologically designed to obliterate dignity and legacy. The rolling in carpets or sacks, the trampling by horses, these were acts crafted to strip away all semblance of royal sanctity, to reduce the caliph to a mere object, crushed and utterly annihilated without the honor of shedding blood on sacred ground. This horrific fate ensured that the Abbasid dynasty ended not with a dignified bow, but with a silent, terrifying whimper beneath the hooves of a conquering horde. The legacy of 1258 is not just one of destruction, but also a catalyst for change. The vacuum left by the caliphate's demise allowed for the rise of new centers of Islamic power and learning, particularly in Mamluk Egypt, Delhi Sultanate in India, and later the emerging Ottoman Empire. Scholars and artists who survived the Mongol onslaught carried their knowledge and skills to these new safe havens, contributing to a diffusion of intellectual traditions. The sheer brutality also compelled many Muslim rulers to learn from Abbasids' mistakes, investing more heavily in military preparedness and diplomatic acumen to avoid similar fates. The Mongol episode at Baghdad, particularly the execution of the caliph and his family, stands as a chilling symbol of the era's raw power dynamics and the human cost of unchecked conquest. It's a story that transcends its historical context, speaking to universal themes of power, destruction, and resilience. The city eventually recovered. The Tigris eventually ran clear again, but the ink of 1,000,000 books and the blood of a royal lineage stained the very soul of Baghdad, a wound that even today evokes a profound sense of loss for the Islamic world. The shock and horror are not merely historical footnotes, they are deeply woven into the fabric of memory, reminding us of the fragility of civilization and the eternal struggle to preserve knowledge and peace against the tides of violence. The end of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad was not just an event, it was an epochal shift, a dramatic and brutal conclusion to an era that had defined brilliance and progress for half a millennium. The image of the caliph, the successor of the prophet, being trampled underfoot in a desperate attempt to avoid royal blood on the earth, remains a potent and disturbing image, encapsulating the true horror of that fateful February morning in 1258. The Mongol mindset behind such acts was rooted in a distinct worldview. Their concept, ovyasa, or law, emphasized absolute loyalty and harsh punishment for disobedience. Resistance was seen as a challenge to the divine mandate of the great Khan, therefore deserving of the most extreme retribution. Hulagu, as a grandson of Genghis Khan, was indoctrinated into this philosophy. The caliph's defiance, however feeble, was an affront that required a definitive, devastating response to terrorize future potential adversaries into submission. The methodical destruction extended to infrastructure and cultural institutions, not out of mere wantonness, but as a calculated tactic to decimate the enemy's ability to recover or mount future challenges. By destroying libraries, they struck at the intellectual foundations that could foster rebellion. By destroying irrigation, they attacked the very economic base. Moreover, the interfaith alliances of the Mongols were complex. While their armies included Christian contingents, Hulagu's mother and primary wife, Doku's Khatun, were Nestorian Christians. There is historical debate as to whether this influenced the specific targeting of Muslim leadership and institutions, or if it was purely strategic. Some medieval accounts claim Hulagu's Christian allies celebrated the destruction of Baghdad as a blow against an enemy of Christendom, but historical consensus points more towards Mongol pragmatism rather than religious crusade. The caliph and his family were seen as obstacles to Mongol dominion, regardless of their religious affiliation, though the symbolic shattering of the caliphate certainly had religious ramifications. The fall of Baghdad was also a stark example of a common pattern in history, a rich, cultured, but militarily weak state, succumbing to a powerful, expansionist, and well-organized military force. The Abbasid Caliphate, despite its immense cultural achievements, had allowed its military strength to atrophy, becoming reliant on others for defense, while its leaders indulged in luxury and political infighting. The warnings from Hulagu were clear, but complacency and misjudgment sealed their fate. The lack of a unified response from other Muslim powers further highlights the fragmentation of the Islamic world at the time, leaving Baghdad isolated in its moment of maximum peril. This tragic tale extends beyond the immediate horror. It serves as a historical case study for the profound and lasting impact of conquest on culture, knowledge, and political structures. The city of peace became a symbol of brutal destruction, and the successor of the Prophet met an end that defied imagination. The story of what the Mongols did to Baghdad's royal family is not just about their execution, it is about the deliberate, calculated obliteration of a dynasty, a spiritual lineage, and an invaluable cultural heritage designed to instill terror and ensure absolute submission. This grim chapter, forever stained in the annals of history, stands as a haunting testament to human cruelty and the devastating consequences of war. The shock does not diminish with the passage of centuries, it only deepens upon understanding the sheer scale of the loss.